Are you crazy? I'm not going to help you rob a store, my mom Marie said when my dad, Joe, had suggested the most absurd idea. The pot behind her whistled, but Joe stood in the same position. He was sweating and rubbing his forehead aggressively. Out of nowhere, he slaps the salt shaker, causing it to break into 1,000 pieces and rain glass and salt onto the floor. How do you think we're going to pay for everything? I have been looking for work for months, but no one is hiring an old convict. We're desperate, Marie. You're supposed to be eating for 2, but you don't eat enough for 1. I've tried everything. It will work. It's so easy, I promise. Marie listens to him go on and on when the ringing in her ear gets louder. The next thing she knows, it's a week later, and they're walking fast into the store at 1 a.m. Remember what I said. Dad repeated the plan to her as they walked faster and faster against the forceful wind. Mom kept her head down the whole time in fear that people will be able to tell from the look in her eyes. Go, he ordered her as they arrive in front of the door. She stood there, staring at all the stickers and flyers plastered all over the door. She puts her hand on her stomach and whispers to me quietly, "For you," and then opens the door. Wobbling more than really necessary, she walked in, grabbed a basket, and walks down the first aisle. She's sweating and chanting the plan in her hand as not to forget. By the time she reached the third aisle, she's already got a few things in her basket. Okay, now's the time. She pretended to struggle to reach for the detergent on the top shelf and then asks the store clerk, "Excuse me, sir, can you please help me?" As the store clerk walked over to help her, Dad snuck in, crouched down, and ran behind the counter. "I just can't reach it. So sorry." "No problem, ma'am." Mom pretended to keep struggling to try to buy him some time. "Though I'm not sure if this is right for me. Is it sensitive enough for babies?" "I don't think so." He studies the bottle. Then, all of a sudden, the alarms in the shop go off. And then as she begins to panic, she looks over to her husband who's standing at the cash register looking like a deer caught in headlights. "Run!" he says to her. The store clerk runs at the speed of Usain Bolt to the cashier and grabs Joe and presses his head against the counter. Joe struggles but can't seem to get free. "I got you now. Think you can run from me? Huh? Wait till the police." And then Mom taps his head with a wine glass and he crumbles to the ground. Dad grabs her hand, stands over him, and they run towards the apartment. What was that?" she asks him while they run. "I don't know. I think he had some high-tech cashier that sounds the alarm when it's being yanked open. I don't know. They made it safely back to the apartment, and after an hour of pacing and stressing, Dad managed to calm my mom down, and they both fell asleep. At 4 a.m., my parents were woken up to someone banging loudly against the door. "It's the police! Open the door or we'll open it for you!" And then, bam! The door was broken away and the police swarmed in, grabbing them both in their pajamas and aggressively pushing them to the ground while handcuffing them. "You have the right to remain silent." Within 24 hours, my mom and my dad were both arrested under suspicion of robbery and attempted murder. They were both sentenced to separate prisons for 10 years, with me still in my mother's womb. "Ah, he's coming! Now!" my mother screamed in her cell. The guards looked at each other without having a clue what to do. "But you said not for another 1 to 2 weeks, guard number 1 said. Guard number 2 nodded in agreement. 1 to 2 weeks, the doctor said. "I don't know what to tell you, but there's a person shooting out of me, whether the doctor or you two like it or not." They started panicking. One of them decided to call a doctor while the other held her stomach and just kept telling her to breathe in and breathe out. While the guard was speaking to the doctor, my mom let out a horrendous scream, and then it was dead silence until the sound of a baby crying broke in. That's me there. Hi, I'm Leo, and I grew up in a women's prison. I came a few weeks early, and no one had yet a clue what they were going to do with me. The guards originally said that I could be transferred to a relative or put up for adoption, but, well, the only relative my mom had was her grandma, who was living in Spain, and adoption was not an option for her. So the guard shrugged and just let me stay with my mom until she changes her mind or gets out. I know what you must be wondering. Does that mean I had to stay a decade in a prison that was for females? Isn't that illegal? Well, apparently not. 2 years went by, and let's just say it could have been worse. People knew that a woman had her 2-year-old son in prison with her, and they were talking about it. A lot. The only people looking after me was my mom and these 2 very kind ladies who tried to teach me things that other kids would learn in school. I, of course, have no memory of this. The one thing I do remember them saying is to keep calm and carry on. It wasn't until 3 years went by when I started to notice something was up. How come I'm the only boy here? I asked my mom. She looked devastated, even though she knew this question would come one day. She just wished that it wouldn't be so early. When my mom told me the story of why we're here, I felt upset and confused, but I was still very young, so I still really had no idea what it really meant. When I was 7, I was fully aware of my difference in appearance to everyone else, and I started to feel uncomfortable and unsafe. Lots of women would shoot me dirty looks when they could, and I could swear some of them tried to grab me sometimes. So, for the most part, I stuck with my mother most of the time. I also started asking her and her friends thousands of questions like, what does a boy look like aside from me? How do you get taller? Is there any other type of food in the world besides mushed peas and hard bread? She would answer all of my questions, and I started to accept that life in prison was normal. But then something happened to me that wasn't normal at all. One day after finishing my lunch, I was walking back to my mom's cell when, in a flash, these 3 scary-looking ladies grabbed me and pulled me to the showers. I was frightened, of course, but I didn't know how to react or what to do since I didn't even know what was happening. They threw me in the shower and stood over me with an unsettling grin on their faces. One of them was a large, curly-haired black woman who was the scariest of them all since she looked like she could step on my head. The other 2 were blonde-haired women who were skinny, but still very rough-looking and intimidating. They started doing things, terrible things, and I was petrified. A few minutes later, a guard found us and tore them off me and escorted them to the office. I don't know what happened to them, but I'm sure they regretted it. I was told to go back to my cell. When I arrived back there, my mother was crying in fear and guilt after I told her what had happened. She realized that this was no place for a child to grow up, and then told me she would get me out of this place. She sobbed and said that I should live in the outside with a temporary family who would look after me until she is set free. I honestly didn't know how to respond since I had never been in the outside world before, but I understood that it's what my mom wanted, so I went along with it. Within a week, I said my final goodbyes to my mom. I was transferred to a family with a husband and wife, with 1 kid named Tim, who was only 8 months older than me. This was going to be the first time I had ever seen another kid my own age, so I was very, very excited. We became good friends, and I had developed a good relationship with my temporary family, but I still really missed my mom. I would see her every month in prison and tell her how I was doing, and would ask her again and again how much longer it would be until she was allowed out of jail. Each time, she told me less and less months, and I would get more excited about it every month. She would tell me every time I would visit her to experience life and always be happy, and that's exactly what I did. March 10th, 2015, my mom was released from prison. I'll never forget the moment she walked out of the gates and we ran to each other under the glistening sun. We hugged for 15 minutes. It was a moment that will live permanently in my mind. A lot has happened since that day. I had to wait a bit before Mom could rent a nice apartment for us to stay in and get a decent job that paid well. But when she did, I said goodbye to my temporary family and promised them I would keep in touch, especially to Tim, for he is now my best friend. I am now 14 and living a good and healthy life with my mother in Florida. We heard that my dad had almost ended a guy in the prison he was at, and he has now got an extended 2 years in jail, but that's the least of our problems. Maybe I'll one day meet him and see how he's doing, but for now, I'll keep calm and carry on.